travel. And you see mobility. Nordic mobility is unique in Europe. You don't see the same sort of mobility from other countries, other regions, other parts. There's something about Scandinavia that produces mobility. So that's why I put this list together. So you also see a general failure of these individual waves of ambition to bring about significant and durable change. The society was very stable, very conservative. At a regional level, you have regional thing places, assembly sites, you have regional laws. It was a society that was almost immune to change, either by individuals or from the outside. The history of the Viking period, when you read the sagas, it's waves and waves of individuals that sought to change the system for their own personal benefit. And basically, they all failed. The stability and the conservatism that you find in Scandinavia is something that continues all the way through. And I think that's interesting. Why didn't Scandinavia change in the way that other places change? We're going to get to Kyiv. Kyiv was a place that was open to change, wanted to change, and grew very rapidly, very differently from what it was when it was founded as a city. So that's what I'd like to think about. Conservative, stable Scandinavia, and then we'll move to Kyiv. So how do you get to Kyiv, or how do you get from Kyiv? I've basically doodled a bit on a map. If you follow the river systems, there's three ways you can do it. You go north from Kyiv. You can either go to the west, now we're on that side, and you can go through the Bug river systems into Poland and then the Vistula. That was probably not used very much because you'd be going through Polish territory and there were conflicts on the border, so that would be something that would be not favored. You can take the middle route, which is up the Desna, and then over to the southern Divina and into the Gulf of Finland, the Gulf of Riga, and then across to Gotland. Again, that was probably not favored because you'd be going through Baltic tribal territory, and that might be politically awkward. So the route on the right, up the Desna, and then up to what is today Staraja Ladoga, into the Gulf of Finland, across to where Stockholm is, and then through the Mälardalen Valley. That would be the most normal route, and in fact, in the sagas it said that's the route that Harald Hardrada and Ellisiv took on their way back to Oslo. So we're going to get to Kyiv finally. I think what I want to talk about before I talk about the city of Kyiv, or the town of Kyiv, and that is the Kyiv Triangle. This is an article from colleagues and friends in Kyiv, Ivan Zodzenko and Alexandra Ivanova. It's her PhD project, actually, called Belligerent Landscapes. This is a highly defended central core heartland of Kyiv. The Irpin River to the left of our picture. Very interestingly, that also formed the defensive line in 2022. It kept the mechanized brigades of the Russian army out of the Kyiv heartland. It's a highly fortified area. The Ukrainian forces did demolish a dam which flooded the Irpin, but that basically saved Kyiv from being surrounded on most sides. It's 130 kilometers from north to south, or 120, and contained within it, you have very many towns. Kyiv was a big town, big city, but you also have lots of other places that were also urban, Vyshgorod, Bilgorod, etc. This was an urbanized core and central heartland, and it was also protected by these serpent walls. Almost a little bit like Hadrian's Wall or a Danavirke between Jutland and the northern German areas. There's actually parallel walls. In some places there are many parallels of it. And this gives you a very strongly defended central heartland of Kyiv. So Kyiv wasn't the only town, but it was the biggest town, of course. This is a reconstruction that has been made by a very bright group of digital people in Kyiv. They're producing lots of these now from the various sites. This is Vyshgorod, about 12 kilometers north of Kyiv. It's now almost part of Greater Kyiv metropolitan area. It's where the river Desna and the Dnipro meet. There's a royal center and citadel. There was a palace there. The excavations that have been held there, there's a lot of ceramic production. So this gives you a view of just what's outside of Kyiv. Now, let's move to Kyiv itself. There's three components. Arguably, there's two. Podil, which is the lower town. You can see by the river. It's a flat area. It means flat area in Ukrainian. This was probably, well, this was the production and commercial area. It would have been, the economic center, the port. And then beyond that, where you see the other squiggle, that would be the upper town, or what's known as Stary Kyiv today. That would be where the larger signal buildings are, the churches, the palaces, etc. There's about 80 meters that you have to go up if you walk from Podil up to the city. And the upper city would have been surrounded by ramparts and walls and palisades, heavily defended. And I put in the bottom here as well, Pechesk Lavra, cave monastery complex. It probably wasn't founded until 1020, but it became very large and an urban settlement grew up on the outside. So this, in a way, gives us three settlement components to medieval Kyiv. We're going to focus now on Podil. Podil has excellent preservation of organic material. There were regular flood events where you have alluvial and colluvial settlements building up to 7 meters in depth, preserving the archaeological layers. This is really a gift because it's heavily urbanized today, but when you dig down, you do get to the archaeology, and the archaeology is wonderfully preserved. The dates for the first urban material is around 862, I think, or 872. That's when the first wooden buildings were found. This is one very famous, one of the largest excavations, Zhytny Rynok. It's the grain market site. There's a market there today, that's why it's called that. This basically points out where the Zhytny Rynok excavation took place. Again, it's quite a good illustration, this one. This is from our period that we are looking at, the 11th century or the early thousands. And as I mentioned, you have alluvial sediments that come down from the deep river. So large flooding events leave sand and silts that give us a very easy to, or give archaeologists a very easy to read stratigraphy when they excavate in this area. And that helps with the dating really quite well. So this is an illustration I've been sent up by Sverrir Viking, sent this to me, who's the director of the Kyiv Excavation Office. I thought this was very illustrative. The dates that you see in the illustration, that's actually the dated, are the dates of those buildings as they were found. And this is a photograph from the excavation. As you can see, it looks very similar to what you'll be found in Oslo at the same time. Cross-timber constructions, lots of mud. You need to have rubber boots. You'd get stuck in the mud, I should think. I have previously in Oslo got stuck in the mud. Excellent preservation of wood, organic materials. This excavation in particular, and other excavations like the Spassky Street excavation, have produced a lot of very valuable information on day-to-day life in Kyiv. Here we are with some of the wooden objects. There's a butter churn. We see some wooden knives and domestic utilities, people working in the mud again. The preservation of the timbers and the quality has meant that it's been possible to make very good reconstructions of the buildings as to how Kyiv would have looked like. I think that's something that I think is very positive with the publications from medieval Kyiv, is the quality of the illustrations that have been made. And then we go up to the upper town. The upper town, or like Stary Kyiv, or Old Kyiv, if you like, that's where the elite and royal settlement would have been, fortified as a citadel. This is a photograph of what's known as the Golden Gate, Zoloty Vorotka, much bigger than it would have been. It's a museum now, and there was a church there previous, but they've tried to recreate in a way what the gate to the city would have looked like, with a earth rampart and palisade, and a brick-built gate eventually, probably later. It's very impressive. We need to talk about the Church of the Tithes, or the Church of the 10%. This was the first large, I think it's the first stone church in Kyiv. There's some discussion about whether there would have been others, but I think this is the first. It was large. It's almost as large as Sofia Cathedral that we'll see. It burnt down and was destroyed. The excavations of it show that it was also highly decorated with mosaics and frescoes. It later became, it was rebuilt later and became a mausoleum for the members of the Rurikid dynasty. But it's been destroyed and rebuilt several times throughout history. Interestingly, Fedir will know all about this. Front of the National Museum of History, there were some controversial attempts at reconstruction, restoration, and in 2023, the removal of a tabernacle that was a symbol of the Church of the Tithes. When I was there now in April, there's about 10 or 15 people standing and praying fervently all day without moving outside, and it's become a bit of a shrine for supporters of the Ukrainian Orthodox Church, which is the one that's connected to the Moscow Patriarchy. We're not going to go into that now. So we get to Sofia Cathedral, which really is, I think, one of the most fantastic churches I've been in or know of. It's absolutely spectacular. You see the original Byzantine form on the left, and on the right you have the 16th, 1700 Ukrainian Baroque style when it was redecorated and ornamented. I prefer the older version, but they're both beautiful. It's been in a museum since 1934. It could easily have been destroyed by the Soviets during the 30s. A lot of churches were blown up. The Church of the Dormition at Petreshklavda was blown up by the Soviets. Luckily, this was preserved as a museum. It's an absolute gem of European architectural value. It's a fantastic place. So this is the interior. Now, what's in the interior? Because that's the important thing. It's a monument to contacts with Constantinople, basically. The mosaics that are there were created by Greek craftsmen who came with the tesserae to make the mosaics themselves. And they basically worked as they'd always worked, creating something that was normal and natural in the Byzantine heartland around Constantinople. When you look at the frescoes and the wall paintings, then you see a little bit more, let's move to the next one. Then you see a little bit more freedom to indulge in presenting something as a local church in a way. Frescoes are cheaper than mosaics. So you have 260 square meters of mosaics, 3,000 square meters of frescoes. The frescoes show more variations in the elements that are being shown. And here's where it gets interesting. There's a very curious element, and that is there are painted scenes from the Hippodrome in Constantinople, where the imperial family are sitting watching the horse racing. And then photoshopped into the background are members of the Rurikid dynasty. So the whole building is a statement of the Rurikids and their contacts to Constantinople. And it's something that's actually quite sweet, actually. It's like, let's move to the next one. Yeah, because there's a lot of repetitive, or I find there's a lot of repetitive symbology reinforcing dynastic power. I find that a little bit naive, a little provincial, but it's wonderfully honest. There's far too many constant allusions to Imperial Byzantium. This can really only be interpreted as a young dynasty, a dynasty that perhaps had not developed its own local and organic mythology that felt that it needed to legitimize itself with connections to Constantinople. And then there's the sarcophagus of Yaroslav the Wise, 6 tons, dragged up from Constantinople. It's impressive, but it's a little bit brash, maybe perhaps a little bit nouveau riche vulgar, I don't know. I love seeing it there. It's absolutely spectacular, but this tells us something about the Rurikid dynasty. It's a young dynasty, a powerful dynasty, who've suddenly got a lot of money, and they're saying, now we're going to be like the Byzantines. Now we're going to show that we have this money. And they're showing it in every possible way. And I think that is, that's one of the most honest things that you see within a church building like St. Sophia. That's the very clear mentality behind much of the ornamentation. Let's look at material culture. I'm going very quickly through these slides because I have quite a few. Kyiv became urban relatively quickly, and it grew and expanded very rapidly. It became very big very quickly. And the way it did that was by including, by bringing in impulses and inspiration from outside. For example, ceramics. There's lots of ceramic production in the area. There always has been, going back into prehistory. But the green glaze ceramics that were normally imported material that came up from Constantinople and Byzantine areas, they suddenly get copied. Local workshops developed within a very short time. They bring things unashamedly from other cultures. They say, we like this, let's make this ourselves. And they do. And that's part of this rapid development that's happening in Kyiv. Really was quite a dynamic place. This is from Maria Timoshenko. This is a slide that she had at a recent conference that we organized. We're now going to look at the carved bone objects, which is the work of Marina Sergeyeva. Again, we see the same pattern. Prior to the 10th century, we see imports, carved bone materials being imported. But then during the urban phases of Kyiv, we find 4 to 5 workshops producing that material themselves. So basically, they adapt, they learn, and they say, we can do this. And it's all about expansion, economic expansion, artistic expansion. And we're now going to move to Harald Hardrada. Okay, so he's 15 years away from Norway. He left as a 15-year-old. And he basically came back with an idea, I can achieve a lot, and I'm going to achieve a lot. He was an ambitious man. He'd seen a different world, different places. He'd seen what rulers could do with money, and he said, I want to do that in Norway. Let's go back. So he takes his wife, and they go back to Norway. And he comes back to Oslo. I'm going to talk a little bit, was Oslo a town? There's a discussion that goes around and round and round constantly. When was Oslo a town? Was it 1000? Was it 1020, 1045? It's a discussion that goes nowhere. So let's think a little bit like Britney Spears. I'm sure you all know who Britney Spears is, and that song of hers from 2001. You know, still a girl, not yet a woman. Well, still a farm, not yet a town. That's how we should think about Oslo at this time. So they come back, Harald Hardrada, a blank canvas. That's how he saw Oslo in Norway, for designing his new medieval vision. Memories and anecdotes from his time abroad. Maybe Norway this time was able to change. Maybe the conservatism and stability that was part of the political system through the Viking period was now open finally for someone to come in and change it. Who knows? Ellisiv, what did she find? Small houses, no large churches, very little cultural diversity, lack of intellectual and philosophical stimuli. She's no longer the daughter of the richest man in Eastern Europe. She's the daughter of Harald in a small place. So, I don't know what we think about that. And so, Harry and Liz, the epilogue. We can have a little bit of fun. It's a Friday. Sometimes we can ask those questions that we really want to ask but can't discuss. Kyiv and its material wonders slowly fade into distant memory, leaving Liz alone with many questions. Did I make the right choices in life? Unfortunately, Liz, you didn't have any choices. You were the daughter of a man who decided who you're going to marry, and you had to go with him. So you can sit there and you can think, were the choices that were made by others for me right or not? But she didn't have any herself. Choices, that's a modern thing. Harry, did he misread the future? Why does change take so long? He was an impatient man. And then he makes the very strange and odd decision to go to Stamford Bridge and join Tostig, who was a rebel. Why did he make that decision? Age 50, he's on a muddy field outside of York, thinking, hey, we can still be Viking, can't we? No, you can't. He gets met by a large army. They get completely annihilated, most of them killed. And that really is the end of the Viking period. Harald, he should have known better. He shouldn't have been there. Thank you very much.
complained bitterly about having to live in this small place called Paris, married to the King of France, after growing up in Kyiv. Okay, we are going to go to our second talk, which is going to be given by another eminent archaeologist, Fedir Androshchuk, who is now working at Uppsala University in Sweden after a distinguished career in Ukraine itself. Fedir will talk to us today about Norway and Rus, material evidence of contact in the early medieval period. Please, Fedir.
Can you hear me? Yeah, yes, that's good. I just need some. Is it this thing I need to switch? No, just yeah. Well, thank you. I will be speaking most about archaeology because I'm an archaeologist, but in some point I will probably use skaldic poetry and other written sources. So when archaeologists search for material evidence of contacts between the Scandinavians and the Rus population, several objects catch their attention. Oriental coins and accessories in form of belt fittings and buckles, which is sometimes decorated in plant ornament, which actually was very popular in a bunch of different nomadic culture of Eurasia. There are also single finds of bronze buttons, which obviously are part of garments of Eastern origin. For instance, like kaftan mentioned by the Arabic authors when they were describing the Rus. Oriental coins, as I said, minted by Umayyad and Abbasid dynasties, appeared in Scandinavia in the second part, the middle and second part of 8th century, as due to increased demand of the silver. The trade routes to the north passed through different vast territory of Eastern Europe, which was populated by different folks. A map showing the distribution of Oriental coins, you can see there's quite a lot of different countries. A very few you can see in Norway. And that is why it was on one of the arguments why archaeologists usually see that Norway was probably most exposed to the British Isles and to the east. But there is some kind of methodological fallacy because it's an old map, and now we have a metal detecting surveys, and more and more Oriental coins are finding. Here you can see some examples of so-called Oriental objects which found in Norway. And probably as just example of hoards which contained Islamic coins, it's a hoard from Voja in Arendal municipality in Aust-Agder, which contained one Abbasid and 8 Samanid coins, dirhams minted in Samarkand in 10th century. Recently, as I said, there are some metal detecting surveys have brought new finds of coins, and one of these finds actually were made in one of these finds is in Manvik in Vestfold, where at least 8 early Abbasid coins from the late of 8th and early of 9th century have been made. And what is interesting, they have 2 holes, and this is interesting. Actually, such cases indicate that these coins were not used as coins, but they were sewn on a headdress And this tradition we can find, for instance, in some Caucasian people who were a part of Khazarian Khaganate, for instance, Alans. And here to the right you can see the dirham from the same time, which has also 2 holes. And there are quite a lot of such which have been made in Saltiv cemetery in Ukraine. So these parallels to the Khazars probably not bad, I think, if we have a look on other archaeological finds of Scandinavian origin which have been made in the area of, it's currently Donetsk and Luhansk Oblast, but formerly it was population where so-called Khazars, or population of Salto-Mayaki culture have been living. And you can see some fragmentary swords of Scandinavian origin which have been found in Mayaki, and it's basically the same area, and also bot rivet. It's very unusual find, and down there it's a sword hilt. It actually was found in Taman Peninsula. It's South Russia, but anyway, it's kind of, well, the same. The objects which belong to the same context. And what is also interesting, it's frying pans. This is typical Norwegian thing, because you can find this just in Norway. In Sweden, this is something which is a Norwegian feature. And unfortunately, I think there are 4 or 5 such finds which have been made in Bititsa area and also in Sumy Oblast. There are at least, I think, 3 or 4 of them. And they actually associated with the settlements of Romance culture, which is basically Slavonic people who were basically neighbors of the Khazars. And also for the same area of Bitisa, for instance, we have a bunch of the lancet-shaped arrowheads. They are not here on the pictures, but anyway, they are known for a kind of form of which indicate the presence of Scandinavians in that area, which we can date to the 9th century. Well, this is very approximate map showing the distribution of Scandinavian objects in Eastern Europe. There are quite a lot, much more been made finds recently, but it gives a look in any way how it's the pattern of the distribution. And you can see the territory of Ukraine, quite a lot of these finds, and also, of course, in northwest Russia and to the east. What is interesting with these finds is, of course, there are quite a lot of finds which belong to the late Viking period, which actually have been made in Ukraine. I mean, hill forts which have been investigated by archaeologists in this area. The northern of them, it's look like here it was a photo from the 1960s, but it shows basically the landscape. And these hill forts actually date into the late 10th and beginning of 11th century. And there is also the south hill fort, which dated later to that 11th, 12th century, and it was probably found by Prince Svetopolk Izyaslawich in 1095. So the most problematic aspects in interpreting the other two place names which mentioned in this rune stone. One of them is so-called Ustaholm, which scholars usually explain as a site, Ustya, mentioned in Rus Chronicle. There is only this picture. It's a map showing the, it's a sketch of archaeological site, which was being actually here detected during 1960s, and with quite a lot of finds of ceramic dating to 11th, 12th century, and which indicated a kind of, well, large settlement here. But unfortunately, this area, that's covered by water, so we can't do more archaeological excavation here. And the width is from 2 meters to, I think, until 20. And just one section of this, yes, these ramparts with the hill fort Zaricha. It is interesting because it's basically one of the sections when we can see the how these constructions. It's a wooden construction, timber wooden constructions, which was made in the body of the walls, and also some hill forts connected to these ramparts have been excavated, and one of them, I think, a silver coin minted by Prince Vladimir was found here. So to the south of Vitishev, along the left bank of the Rus River, there lies the last line of the ramparts, written source indicate that these fortifications marked the border of the Rus land with the nomadic peoples. And this context is crucial for understanding guard, which is likely to refer to a type of border fence or palisade. So within this area, restricted by serpent ramparts, various objects of Scandinavian origin have been found, both male and female. Some of these artifacts date back to the 10th century, others belong to the 11th century. Let's have a look on some of them. The most magnificent of these finds is a sword from Dimmer, it's to the left, which was found. It's a visual area. Unfortunately, casual find, but it has a very beautiful decorated hilt in so-called Ringerike style. And it's also to the right, you can see this silver neck ring, which is typical Scandinavian jewelry, which was found in Worzel on the bank of the Irpin River. So we have a kind of both male and female objects in this area. Well, now it's important to see what Norway can tell us on Norwegian finds. This is a selection, very just small of them, but I think very interesting. It's, for instance, there is particular beads with the gold and silver foiled, yes, which was found in Flom in Westland. And these beads, actually, archaeologists believe they originate from Byzantium, but they are very, very popular in Rus as well. And it is actually a kind of chronological indicator of 11th century. And also there are some typical lily-shaped buckles. They are very popular in Rus in the 11th century. There are at least two finds in Norway. One of this in Vider in Nordland, but there is also another one in Trondheim. And of course, all you know this silver coin. It's minted. It's for Prince Jaroslav, and it's found from Ness. It's actually so the Scandinavian imitation of Jaroslav coinage, but I think it's very interesting phenomenon because most of these, they are very limited number, but most of them have been made beyond the border of Rus. Very light. The weight is more close to the Anglo-Saxon coins actually. Yes, and then you know with the adoption of Christianity, archaeological, grave goods, they have disappeared gradually from the grave. And the cross-shaped pendants, the only fine category which tell us about the context with the East. And one of these categories, a Byzantine in Kolpir, it's a reliquary cross, which Byzantines, they actually distributed them between barbarian people and papas. So in such way, they distribute them as Christianity, knowledge about Christianity, and also it was, because quite often these were very exclusive finds, you know, with some precious stones, and they quite often had been made of gold and silver. So it also an indication of social status of some people. So to the left, you can see this. It's a classical Byzantine product, but to the right, I believe this is a Norwegian imitation. It's a find made in Tonsberg, a casual, but in any way, some kind of replica of the reliquary cross with imitation, glass imitation, which probably imitate amethyst stones. There are another selection of objects. They are reliquary crosses, but made in Norway as a replica of Byzantine. reliquary crosses. And we can see this in the way how they were actually decorated. It's quite, they are, I mean, iconographically it's very simple way, and they definitely have some local features. And you can see local interpretations. Some Jesus can be, can be represented, and I think in local interpretation, like with the mustache, beardless, and can have a kind of almond-shaped eyes, and and sometimes you can see also chains attached with the terminals decorated in a typical urne style. So this is like a context, one of this hoard, which from Langnes, I think, yes, but it's indicate that this is Scandinavian. Well, this find made north, but in any way, it's no doubt that it's Scandinavian, not Finnish owners. I mean, because you can see a lot of most of the objects made in according to Scandinavian traditions. Yeah, this map showing actually the distribution of one of type of crows, which was very popular both in Scandinavia and Eastern Europe. And there are some finds here in Norway, at least 2, but probably there are more. Just I found 2 of them detected. But I think they actually indicated the kind of knowledge about this Eastern Christianity, and probably were brought to Scandinavia like souvenirs, or probably even by those who were actually Christians or adopted Christianity in Rus. What is interesting that there are some objects in Kolpi, reliquary cross of Kyiv origin, like here to the right, it was find made in Nordland. But they've been produced in Kyiv because there is a mold found in the vicinity of the Desatina Church, the church. And this finds it interesting because they are actually indicate it's the middle of the 13th century. It's beyond the Viking, so it's very light time. There are other examples, particularly to the left, you can see another type of cross, which a typical 13th century object. So I think this is very interesting because this indicates that this context not limited just by the Viking period. They were actually continued to the until the Mongol invasion. What is interesting, actually, so that quite a lot of these objects made in Kyiv Rus, they come from the same areas where a lot of these Finno-Ugric objects, these pendants, have been found. They actually have Eastern origin and associated with the probably Karelians or Chuds. There are different interpretations, but in any way, yes, there is also just some objects we can indicate connection of Oriental coins or Oriental objects with the Swedish laps. And this, I think it's interesting because in such a way, laps were very kind of intermediary who helped to distribute these Rus objects. I just some conclusions which can be actually summarized of this. Yes, I thought the small finds, big issues they are. Archaeological evidence suggests the involvement of both females and males in the mutual context between Norway and Rus. And the Alstad inscription testified to detailed knowledge of the Rus core area. Finds of Eastern origin suggest the dissemination and local imitation among the local Norwegian elite and Finnic-speaking population of the north. There are clear material evidence indicating the role of Swedish Lapps and Karelians in the dissemination of Eastern objects, including those made in Kyiv. This context continued long after the Viking Age and were ultimately interrupted by the Mongol invasion of Kyiv. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Fedir. How wonderful to see all these objects. I hope you saw some objects on your way in here when we went through the Viking exhibit, of course. We are now for our third talk of this panel. We are guested by a distinguished professor of history from the University of Iceland in Reykjavik, Sverrir Jakobsson, who is today going to talk to us about Harald Ellisiv and 11th century high politics. Please.
So where do I? Okay. Okay. Thank you. Is it okay? Okay. Okay. Can you hear me?
That's right.
Can everyone hear me? Carl Farrugia, can you hear me? Yeah. Okay. Yes, today I'm going to discuss briefly the context of the marriage between Harald and Ellisiv, or Elizabeth, if you like, and how it fits into the high politics of the 1040s. And in the introduction to the conference, it was said that they married in 1044. That's a guess, but it might be true. And I'm going to explain why 1044 might be a good date to set the wedding of Harald and Elizabeth. And it also deals with the ethnicities of that time, including the Rus and the Varangians. So I'm going to start a little by discussing the sources I'm basing my analysis on, the written sources, and then why I think some of them are good sources and some of them are kind of overestimated. Then I will go to the sources I regard as important, and finally I will try to explain a bit about the high politics stuff. So starting with this, these are the main sources for our knowledge of Harald. And I start with the early sources, which are external, that's to say non-Scandinavian sources. And they include a source in Greek, Logos Nouthetikos, Prospasileia by Kekomenos. It's a kind of addition to his better-known work, Strategikon, and it's composed in the 1070s. And then we have a church history, Gesta Hammaburgensis Ecclesiae Pontificium by Adam of Bremen, also composed in the 1070s. And as you all know, because it's supposed to have ended the Viking Age, Harald died in 1066. So these are sources that were composed shortly after the death of Harald. Now, I'm not going to discuss them much today, but the Anglo-Saxon chronicles also provide some information on Harald and other Norwegian kings, and here I'm just using them in a supplementary way for chronological purposes. And then we have the Scandinavian sources, which were composed a lot later. So I say mostly late, because some of the Skaldic poetry might be contemporary, but it's written down as part of 13th century literature, which means that we cannot trust them as to individual names, terms, and vocabulary, because they might be corrupted. Although I myself have been tempted to use them just to provide the general view of Harald at an early stage. Then we have 12th century sources, starting by Íslendingabók by the Icelander Ari Þorgilsson, which sets the scene for a new tradition of writing about Norwegian kings, explaining the genealogies and relationship between earlier kings. Then we have the start, really, of Scandinavian historiography with Latin history, such as Historia de Antiquitate Regum Norvagiensum by the monk Theodoricus, and also the much better known Gesta Danorum by Saxo Grammaticum. And when we have the king sagas from the early 13th century, like Morkinskinna, Heimskringla, Fagurskinna. And just to provide you with some context, in these sagas, Harald battles a dragon. He is a dragon slayer. So we have these histories where Harald is fighting a dragon, and it's very hard to take a story with a dragon, remove the dragon, and say this is authentic history. Just a dragon story with the dragon taken out of it. So this is why these sources have to be distrusted, but unfortunately they are often used in sort of conjunction with the earlier, more reliable sources, and you cannot really do that. You have to be very careful when you're using these sources. None of these sources includes the nickname Harald Hardrada. That comes from the late 14th century Flateyjarbók, an Icelandic chronicle, which invents nicknames for all Norwegian kings, and some of them have stuck, and some of them have not. So Harald Hardrada is a late medieval invention. If he had a nickname in the 11th century, it was probably Harfagara or Fairhair, which is called in Anglo-Saxon sources or English sources. So just to remind you, I'm not going to be talking about the sagas very much here. So now we go to the sources that can be trusted a little bit about Harald. And we start with the oration of admonition, which, as I said earlier, was originally composed in Greek. So this source mentions a king that is clearly Harald. And it says, Araltes was the son of the king of Varangia, and he had a brother, Iulavos. After his father's death, the latter took the father's royal power, placing his brother Araltes second to him in authority. Which kind of implies that when his brother was king, Araltes was a rather mature individual, which is contrary to what I were told in the sagas, that he was a juvenile at the time. So maybe this is correct, and the sagas are wrong about that. Now, the Varangians, who are the Varangians? I have spent a lot of time during my career just trying to explain what the Varangians might be, and this is kind of a definition that I have used. Varangians are called in the East by Arabic, Greek sources, Latin sources. Varangians are Scandinavians who are not the Rus, because the Rus, original term for all the Varangians, Scandinavians, was the Rus. Of course, Rus, the term might include also other peoples, not only Scandinavians. But the Scandinavians mentioned in written sources, they are called Rus. But in the 11th century, we had states belonging to the Rus, principalities, kingdoms, and the Rus are part of those kingdoms. Then we need a new term for the Scandinavians who are not coming from these kingdoms. And I think the Varangians is a broad term for people coming from these kingdoms. So bad news, Varangia is not Norway, although this seems to imply that Varangia is the same as Norway. Probably not. Varangians could be any Scandinavian from the Denmark, Sweden, or Norway. And this source relates that Harald arrived in the Roman Empire. I prefer the term Roman to Byzantine because the empire was just continuation of ancient Roman Empire. So when I say Roman here today, I always mean what some of us would call also the Byzantine Empire. So Harald arrived in the Roman Empire during the tenure of Michael the Paphlagonian, and we know when he ruled between 1034 and 1041 with 500 men, which is a substantial military group in this time. So he came as a sort of mercenary or support with a supporting army. And then it's related that he fought on behalf of the Romans in Sicily. They were trying to reconquer the island from the Arabs. And then in Bulgaria, and we know of a Bulgarian revolt in 1043. So this is concrete information provided by this text composed shortly after the death of Harald. And then very famously, it is said that he received the imperial titles Mangla Vites and Spatharo Candidates, and these are known terms in the Roman army, and according to my colleague Yannis Douraitis, they would have taken a lot of money to purchase these titles. And this seems to indicate that Harald wanted to make a career in the Roman Empire because he had bought expensive imperial army titles. Sort of invested, you can say. When you were granted these titles, you would give money in thanks to the Roman Empire, but then you would make money from having these offices. So this is an investment of the time. But not a good investment if your intention is to leave very soon. Now, what does the other near contemporary source say? Gesta Hammaburger sensus Ecclesiae Pontificium. And it confirms this narrative in some manner. It says that King Olaf, son of Olaf Tryggvason, this is before the genealogies of Ari Thorgilsson, which tells us that the two Olafs are not directly, or they are both descendants of an earlier king, Harald, also called Harald Harfari. But Adam doesn't know of this. He is writing decades before Ari. So he says that King Olaf was the son of Olaf Tryggvason, and he took over the kingdom of Norway following the death of Sven, the ruler of Denmark, who also ruled England. And he also ruled Norway. So this is an important king who died in 1014. So this gives us an idea of the chronology, that when Olaf is ruling Norway, that's after 1014. And then he was chased away and killed by the son of Sven, Knud, who in England is called Canute. This is Canute the Great. And he is also great because he also ruled Denmark and Norway and England. So these are some of the most famous late Viking kings, if we should talk about Vikings in this period at all. So this is at least the late Viking age. And then it says in the sources that Haraldus, the brother of the king and martyr Olaf, had left his brother while he was still alive. So he is not fighting at Stiklestad. That is an invention of the sagas. And he went to Constantinople, where he fought against Saracens at sea and Scythians in the interior. So this can be very easily fitted with the testimony of the oration of admonition. Now, it seems that, according to this source, Harald was brought for the last part of the reign of Olaf, that's to say before 1028, and the reign of Knut and his son, the reign of Magnus, the son of Olaf, and the short-lived reign of Sven, the nephew of Knut, called Sven Estridsen in Danish historiography. So he was around 20 years abroad. This is a mystery because he is only connected with the reign of Michael the Paphlagonian in the oration of admonition and the kings who succeeded him. Now, in neither of these sources is anything said about Harald and the Rus, so that's the first mystery. But of course, to go to Constantinople, he would have traveled through somewhere, and most likely the Rus, as was shown that was the best way to get to Constantinople. So we have to say, where was Harald and his 500 merry men before he came to the Constantinople, which was in 1034 at the earliest, or 1038 at the latest? He would have had to have been there before 1038 to be a part of the Sicilian campaign. So most likely explanation is, of course, that Harald was among the Rus. He was familiarizing himself with them. And we even have a possible context in the Povest Vremenic Liet, or primary chronicle, which says that Prince Yaroslav fought against the Pechenegs in 1036, and he had a large army of Varangians and Slavs. So this is, of course, a later source, which uses the term Varangian quite a lot, and often very anachronistically. They talk about Varangians in the 9th century, which no contemporary source does. But again, this could be the army of Haraldr. And also, Pechenegs are sometimes called Scythians by the Romans, which would fit with the testimony of Gesta Hammarbergensis. And then Gesta Hammarbergensis has some additions to it, the so-called scholia, and some of them were made quite soon after the composition of the work, including the scholion I'm going to refer now. And then there we have a scholion which says that following his return from Constantinople, Haraldr married the daughter of the king of Rus, Gjerslef. So here we have the evidence for Elizabeth, one of the earliest sources that at least makes a reference to her, even if she is not mentioned. And this is the queen in the cathedral, which is often said to have been Elizabeth. When you try to guess which daughter is actually Elizabeth, this is the most popular idea. So, to conclude, I would like to argue that Elizabeth is probably connected to the mysterious departure of Haraldr from Constantinople. And just to give an example from my biography, my first article about Haraldr was written in the Icelandic daily Morgunblaðið in 1996. And it was devoted to the verses he is supposed to have composed to his wife, Elizabeth, which I'm not going to refer to in my talk today. And the editor of Morgunblaðið got a quite well-known illustrator to illustrate the article. So this is the illustration he made of King Haraldr. So this is my contribution to Icelandic art history, a modest contribution, that is to say, to have inspired the illustrator of this drawing. Now, at the end of the text about Haraldr in the Oration of Admonition, it is said that after the passing of Emperor Michael, that is to say in 1041, and of his nephew who had succeeded him, Harald is wished in the time of the Emperor Monomachos, that is to say 1042 or later, to get royal permission to return to his own land, but it was not forthcoming. Indeed, the road out was obstructed. Very cryptic language here. Yet he slipped away and took the throne in his own country in place of his brother Iulavus. And he did not complain about the titles Manglavitis or Spathor Candidates he had been honored with, but instead, as king, he showed good faith and brotherly love toward the Romans. So we know that there must be a sequel to the saga of Haraldr, that he was in continued contact with the Romans, because the last sentence would make no sense if he had not carried on his relationship towards the Roman Empire. But of course, this is very cryptic, and no source states why he left. But as we know from what Yannis Duraitis has said about the titles, he must have had a change of heart. He had actually planned to stay in the Roman Empire, but then he left. And the only possible context I can think of is the attack of the Rus on Constantinople in 1043, which is much later than all the other attacks of the Rus on Constantinople by the son of Prince Yaroslav. And the theory I'm going to put forward is that this would have placed Harald in a delicate position, because he is somehow related to the Rus in some way. Possibly because he had stayed with them, he had gone from Rus to the Roman Empire. So he is suspect due to this attack of the Rus on Constantinople. And this is the high politics I was referring to, because this is a war between kingdoms. So this happened in 1043, so it fits with it being during the reign of Constantine Monomachos, and also fits with the return of Haraldr to Norway a few years later, so soon after. So what Harald would have said when this, and now I move into the realm of speculation, is that I'm not Rus, I am a Varangian. So he would have used the term that was now being invented for Scandinavians who were not from the Rus, but this was not enough to clear him of suspicion. So he left the country, slipped away. But then the Roman emperors later decided that Harald was probably innocent, and this does not cast any spell over his later alliance with the Romans. And this alliance continued between Norway and the Roman Empire. It's still in place in the 12th century, and even as late as 1196, when the Roman Emperor asked the Norwegian king to send him soldiers. So Harald was probably vulnerable, and because he had some relationship with Rus, and you could say probably a fiancé. That's my final guess, which substantiates the guess I mentioned earlier, that they had married in 1044. So possibly Harald was connected to the royal family of the Rus, and this, when he leaves Constantinople, he decides to cement this alliance, and he is married to the Princess Elizabeth, who would then follow his Harald back to Norway, where his nephew is the king, and he later becomes king as well. And all the skaldic poems about Harald, which may be reliable, they mention his immense wealth, and this is what is illustrated in this article from the Morgunblaðið in 1996. So this is the probable context of the marriage between Harald and Elizabeth, sometime after 1043, why not in 1044? So thank you.
Thank you very much, Sverrir, for telling us about the great politics around King Harald, or the... I hesitate to try to pronounce this title, Manglavites, Harald, as we probably should call him, before he became king. We have had 3 wonderful papers, I feel, that has given us a lot of context to the marriage of Ellisiv and Harald, both from an archaeological point of view, from a material culture point of view, and now from a historical point of view. I think it has been wonderful. I hope you agree with me. Do we have any questions from the audience? We have a few minutes for questions. Yes, please.
Can we use the microphones?
Yes.
So that the people online can hear us.
All right, there are people online too. Should we give this to the people who ask? Or?
I will have one and turn it on.
Hello?
No.
Should I just come up there?
No?
Thank you. Yes, please wait for the microphone before you say anything. So, and this is we must remember there are people who were not as lucky as you to get tickets for this event, who has to sit at home and look at their computers. Those of you who are not teachers or give a lot of public speeches will not maybe know that this is what happens every day of my life, that the equipment does not work in the classroom. We are extremely fortunate here that we have very good help from Christina, who actually knows stuff, unlike me, about how this works. Am I talking you up too much?
Maybe, I don't know. Hello. Okay.
Thank you.
Please try to keep the questions relatively brief.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for very interesting introductions for us today. My name is Tore Valaker. and I have two questions for the last lecture, actually. The first thing is, when is the term Varangians first come into use, or when is it first recorded as used? The second thing I just wanted to say is maybe not a question, maybe it's just another speculation upon the speculation of the last note there on the attack of Rus and why Harald disappeared. Is it not just as likely that Harald was participant in the attack on Constantinople together with the Rus, since he was a Rus, and that is why he fled after the attack?
Thank you. Sverrir, would you like to answer?
Yes. Can you hear me? Yeah. Well, one of the earliest instances is in an Arabic source from around 1030 by Al-Biruni, the famous polymath. And he distinguishes between the Varangians and the Rus in a map he made of the north. It's in quite common use in the late 11th century. There is an incident involving Varangians in 1034 in the Skilitzes Chronicle, but that is composed later. What we can say is it's in quite common use in the late 11th century, and during this time this oration of admonition is composed. It has become common, and probably because some term was needed to distinguish Varangians from the Rus, so it's probably from slightly before the time of Harald in the early 11th century. Also, it's interesting, of course, was Harald actually guilty of what he might have been accused of conspiring with the Rus? And I would say probably not, because he had bought these good titles. So that makes it less likely that he was in cahoots with the Rus. And also, the kind of language used for him kind of implies that he was not regarded as an enemy of the Roman. So what we can piece together is that he claimed to be innocent, and the author of the oration of admonitions probably believed that he was innocent. So it's more likely that he was not involved in that, although it's possible. But after, of course, he has to leave, he clearly decides to ally with the Rus and be sort of formalize his relationship with Yaroslav, who was already allied to both the Norwegian and Swedish kings.
Thank you very much. If I may just add, I'm very grateful to you for explaining to me what the difference between Varangians and Rus are, because the sources from this time are mind-boggling when you're trying to make this out. But I think you managed to pinpoint a good explanation, so thank you. And thank you for the question. Do we have other questions?
Thanks a lot for good talks. My name is Sven Gullbeck. I'm working as a numismatist in this museum. A question to Professor Androshchuk. My archaeological colleagues tells me now and then that there were more Scandinavian settlers in the east than in the west. Can you comment upon that?
Yes, that's true. I think this is actually something which was overlooked during many decennia. It's because of this Iron Curtain, and people didn't have close contact with Eastern Europe. And I think the current Viking Age scholarship was pretty much politically impacted by such phenomena as Viking congresses, and the first Viking Congress was established in 1946, and it is actually designed like a British club. You need to be invited, and there is also I think it's basically Scandinavian countries which were invited, and of course UK, Ireland, but no non-German, I think, archaeologists until, I think, recently time. And I think this is, of course, no Russians, because it was Soviet Union, it was impossible. But I think it's due to some Scandinavian scholars who actually were very interested in this context with this. I mean, Tore Arne, for instance, Ingmar Jansson, yes, they actually paved this road, and due to this, scholarships, we actually discovered that quite a lot of objects we have in Eastern Europe indicate, particularly if you count in number of owl brooches, short types and stuff, that will be much more than we have in France, for instance, or even UK. So because I think if we were talking about British Isles, it's just Scotland and Ireland which has numerous finds of Scandinavian origin, but other, I think, where they are more disputable. They are probably Viking inspired, some jewelries, for instance, but they are not genius Scandinavian artifacts, to my opinion. So I think this very interesting. This open quite new horizon about exploring this context between Scandinavia and Rus, and I think there are more subjects to discuss. Thanks.
Thank you for the question, and thank you, Fedir, for a very interesting answer. More questions? Please. It seems that everybody wants to ask are concentrated right there. Could write it.
My name is Ola Berstad. Question to Professor Jakobsson. You seem to dismiss these sagas, including Heimskringla, when it comes to the kind of accuracy or plausibility of the sources. But when it comes to Ellisiv, I suppose that the saga about Harald is the only written source we have, or maybe at all source. Is there any written source in Kyiv, the primary chronicle, which mentions this? Or is it only Snorri or other saga writers? And there's no firmer contemporary source linking Ellisiv and Yaroslav and so on with Harald?
Well, we have, of course, the Skolion, which is quite early, that says that Harald married a daughter of King Yaroslav. I think she's mostly used by method of elimination. That's to say, there are other princesses, but they were married to other kings. So this is why it must be Elizabeth. She's not mentioned, I think, in the primary chronicle at all. But she may be in some other written source. I don't really know about. I haven't looked all over the place for her hitherto, but I might want to do so, find the first source that actually names her name. But you know, because of the Skolion that quite unambiguously says that he was married to the daughter of Prince Yaroslav, we have no reason to doubt that this is indeed the case. And Yaroslav had a daughter. It's in his genealogies that he had a daughter called Elisaveta. So of course, it would be better to have a source that says Harald married Elisaveta, but it's as close as we can get.
Thank you for the question, and thank you for the answer. We continued with the questioning segment of the audience. Please, ma'am.
Okay. Mr. Hill, thank you for your lecture, and thank you for showing us old Kyiv. And on your second last slide, something went a little bit too quickly for me, because you were trying to describe what Ellisiv did not find when she came to Oslo. That's my question.
I think the point that I wanted to make is that Oslo around 1040 was probably not yet a town in the way that we would understand it as a town. There would have been a large farm that they called the King's Farm or the Royal Farm, and there would have been some buildings connected. There would have been a half-finished small church, Church of St. Clements, and that was basically it. So the point that I really want to make was that she came from a very large urban site that was rapidly developing, something almost like Chicago in 1910 or Dubai at the moment. It was growing and growing quickly, and suddenly everybody was getting rich, everybody was enjoying themselves, it was a lot of fun. And then she basically came to a place that was a farm with a few buildings, and it probably wasn't yet a town, but it was going to be a town. So that was the commentary that I wanted to make to understand the situation that she found herself in when she arrived in Oslo. So.
Thank you.
Thank you both. These are interesting questions. There was just at the end of last year, there was this beautiful book published about Oslo during the Middle Ages and the early modern era, which well, several people in the room are actually authors in that book that collected a lot of very good writing about Oslo during this period. And I was actually surprised by the fact that David is pointing out we don't think about it, but Oslo wasn't really much in Harald's time in terms of towns. Please, we have a question there.
Yes.
Please wait for the microphone.
No. Okay, hear me. You said that they settled down in Oslo, but do we have knowledge of that they really settled down in Oslo and not now somewhere else in Norway? That was the typical time that the kings and the court moved around.
That's a very good point, and thank you very much for making that. We don't know. We assume, and why do we assume? Well, because Oslo is the capital today. So we assume that whenever Oslo was Oslo, it was the center of Norway. But you're absolutely right. Harald Hardrada, his family and his roots were in Ringerike. That's where he had a farm. I would suggest that they were there a lot and they moved around. They would only really be in Oslo when there was a reason to be there. So you're absolutely right, and thank you very much for that question. I think that's one of the arrogant things that we often assume when we discuss Norway, is that because Oslo is now the biggest city and the capital, therefore it always has been the center of Norway. And that's really not the case. There wasn't a capital until, let's say, somewhere in the 1200s. Up until then, there was a lot of movement between places, and most of the royal families had their local farms and connections where they felt more comfortable, I should think. So, yes, that was a very good question. Thank you.
I was wondering, when we were shown all these artifacts that were related between Norway and the Kyiv area, and so many of the artifacts actually comes from northern Norway. And you didn't even, we don't even mention it because we concentrated on Oslo. Do you have an explanation on that?
Yes, I think. Yes, I think one. It actually probably two possible explanation. We have definitely a kind of we had clear Rus impact in Trondheim, but of course there are in northern parts. Northern, yes. I think it's due to the Lapps, actually, because they were in close contacts with the Swedish Lapps, and we can see it in some objects which definitely were brought from Sweden here, and I think some of these Finno-Ugric pendants, rattle pendants. They actually have origination from Ladega and Tonega area, so it was actually populated by Tudor Karelia. It's still, there are debates about it, but I think it's actually definitely saying something about very intensive network between these Finnic, Laponian and Finno-Ugric populations. And I think if you see quite a lot of these objects, they have a kind of religion meaning. And of course, I can see this. They indicate this influence of Rus metropolia. But I think it's some form of some sort of expansion. Probably those Finno-Ugric tribes, which were actually tributary of Rus princes, because they have definitely some trading deals in Finnmark, and we know from the late period that Karelians were very active in Finnmark, yes, and Novgorodians, and so I think there quite a bunch of different explanation might be, but I think this is quite huge, but very interesting. Sub-questions which need to be explored in future, actually. So we just overlooked, we are talking about Norwegian elites, but we overlooked this Laponian and Finno-Ugric population, which have also their own history in this connection with Rus. But it's interesting, all this abrupted with the Mongolian invasion. So and then there is another story. It's Novgorod and Norway has a kind of own history from the late period, but it's another story. I mean.
Thank you very much. We will take a last question before we break for coffee. Please, sir.
Thank you. My name is Tore Desrud, and I have a comment or questions regarding the importance or not importance of Oslo. As far as I know, Harald started the building of the cathedral, the Hallvards Cathedral in Old Oslo, and he moved the body of Hallvard from Lier to Oslo. And could that be a sign of that Oslo had some importance to him or not? And I just learned that most possibly Harald himself was buried in Trondheim. So what could be the value of Oslo, the importance of Oslo regarding the importance of Trondheim during his reign? Thank you.
Well, I'll answer the last one first. I think the importance of Trondheim or Nidaros is because his half-brother was there. And it would be a very symbolic way in which to be buried, because he's now become Saint Olaf. So I think that was probably the decision around the burial in Trondheim. The Harald Hardrada would have been a part king for the first 2 years of his return. And then the last 18 years of his life, he would have been the sole king. So there would have been a very big difference between Oslo in 1044 and a very big difference in Oslo in 1066. He was an ambitious man, apparently had a big box with money, though there's some discussion on how much he had with him when he actually got back. He might have to have paid a lot of people in order to get safe passage back to Scandinavia. And that's a different discussion. But he started building projects. He is the person who's been credited with building Oslo, starting Oslo in the sagas, starting a Kaupang or a commercial center. So what he came back to in 1044 was a very different Oslo to what Oslo was when he died in 1066. I think that's the basic main point. I mean, this is it was a period with a lot of change and a lot of development. The 11th century was really a fast-moving century. That's when you really do see change. The point I wanted to make about there not being much change in the Viking period is because you do see a lot of stability, but the 11th century is when a lot of things happen. In terms of religion, in terms of economy, in terms of a changing geopolitical structure, and in terms of the fact that you then begin to get kings who are actually able to create a Christian realm and gain more and more control over legal legal aspects of their particular countries and also the economics, etc. So, and it's also where you see towns for the first time in what we understand them as towns. Prior to that, you don't have towns. Kaupang wasn't a town; it was a commercial, seasonal centre. So the 11th century was a very fast-moving. It's very difficult to say. It's very difficult to say when things actually became what we would like them to have become, because everything was changing and developing. But yes, no, he was an ambitious man with plans, and that's really when Oslo began to develop in the way that we understand it as one of the leading towns. We of course have all the other leading towns as well: Tønsberg, Bergen, Nidaros, Trondheim, etc. But yes.
Thank you very much. Thank you for questions, and let's thank our panel. We will now have a coffee break. There's coffee and tea, and I don't know what else out there in the hallway. You might want to take an opportunity, if you haven't looked at it recently, look at the Viking exhibit that's right outside. But don't take any coffee or food or anything you can eat into the exhibit. The guards will be very, very worried about it. We'll start here again with the second panel at 3 o'clock sharp. So please come back. Thank you.